The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a masterpiece of horror. It has compelling characters, grisly atmosphere, and thematically resonant elements that contribute to the greater cultural heritage. Texas Chainsaw Massacre has none of those things. It's devoid of meaning, looks like every well-shot film from the last decade, and manages to make you hate the main characters within the first few minutes of screen time. It's a film directed by David Blue Garcia, co-directed by Christian Mai and Edward Matthias, and was released in 2022 on Netflix. Garcia has a single directing credit before, although a dozen or so as a cinematographer. The others have nothing, not even an IMDb page. Filming took place in Bulgaria, which is notably not in Texas. The basic plot is a group of 20-somethings have purchased a ghost town and are now auctioning it off to other hipsters of similar ages. How they got the money for one house, let alone a town, is never mentioned. Unfortunately, they discover one of the buildings is still occupied, an orphanage. The elderly woman insists she still owns the place and is understandably upset when they evict her. Her adopted son, Leatherface, comes to defend her, but she suffers some sort of stroke and has to be escorted away. After she dies in the car, he becomes quite irate and proceeds to murder everyone. The Chainsaw franchise has always been about the family, sometimes Sawyer, sometimes Hewitt. They're cannibals and serial killers, and Leatherface is a mentally deficient member of the clan. He typically works under their orders, and is often mocked and beaten by them, acting out of fear and self-defense when not under their command. Here, there is no family, as Leatherface is an orphan. Basically takes everything that was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films and throws it away. It seems like the writer of this film has never seen the original, because it so blatantly ignores everything. Themes, characters, timeline, environment, score, not a single thing, except a mass killer with a chainsaw, bears resemblance to the original. We can focus here on Leatherface as he is the main villain of this film, but that's not what he's supposed to be. In the original, he acts in self-defense. He was subservient to his family, afraid and confused. He was more of a beast than a killer. In this new film, however, he's John Wick and goes on a roaring rampage of revenge after his loved one is killed. There's even a scene that mimics the original John Wick, with him digging into a hidden compartment to find his signature weapon. In this case, of course, it is a chainsaw, which miraculously works after nearly 50 years in a wall. He also lays traps for characters, and is brutal to the point of torturing them. He also throws hammers like an Olympic shot putter. He is Jason from the remake, or Michael Myers from the most recent series of films. Supernatural in both endurance and strength, despite being about 70 years old. Of course, the film also apes from Halloween in other ways, such as bringing back the protagonist from the first film. In this case, however, the original actor had passed, so there's a necessary replacement. Of course, despite wanting to take that plot element from the recent Halloween film, it just doesn't work. Jamie Lee Curtis, or Laura, had been in 4 films in the series and was definitively the protagonist. Sally, on the other hand, was in a single film with sort of a strange reference at the end of 3, but nothing else. There's no emotional impact of her coming back, and she has about 6 minutes of screen time. She holds Leatherface up with a shotgun at point-blank range, and after demanding that he say her name multiple times, he does nothing and walks away, and she lets him walk away. Somehow in the next scene, he's outside threatening the kids, which she locked in the car as some sort of bait, despite the fact that she didn't need bait, she found him anyway. And then she finally shoots him several times, one of which he deflects with a chainsaw. And then she is chainsawed herself, thrown across the alleyway, and then about 5 minutes later, her shotgun is miraculously back in her hands and she's alive to shoot Leatherface again. But that's just one of the many stupid things in the film. Coming back to basic continuity/timeline issues, there's no mention of the rest of the family by Sally, who is tormented by them, or anyone else in the film. So somehow in the 2 years between the original and this one, Leatherface was adapted into an orphanage and everyone just sort of forgot about him. There's also the fact that Sally has a photograph that the hitchhiker in the original took. Regardless of the fact that it was his photograph, he also burned it in that first scene of the film, which seems to imply that the writers of this film saw about 10 minutes, maybe just before he burned the photograph, and then that was all they saw of the original film, and then maybe read a plot summary. It's just baffling things like this that make it not work in any way. While it is directed competently, it never even tries to capture the atmosphere or the grim or grit of the original or even some of the sequels. It's this very clean style of film that looks good if you're sort of looking for well-lit shots, well-made shots, but misses out so much on what it means to be a Texas Chainsaw movie. It just doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the franchise. That's also the gore and kills. Leatherface seems to take joy out of killing people, and in the first kill of the film, he breaks open the police officer's arm and then stabs them with the bone. It's gory and brutal and fits in a slasher film, but chainsaw films have never been slasher films. That's not what they're about at all. And again, it just seems to fail to capture what makes the essence of these movies. The characters themselves are just awful. Melody, one of the main protagonists, there is a pair of sisters who would be the final girls. First on screen is complaining, and then as the sort of redneck cowboy comes up, she insults him for having a pistol on him right in front of his face, but tries to play it off like she's not doing it in front of his face. They're like 5 feet away, and she's insulting him plainly, and when he responds, she seems affronted. Later, they have to meet up with him, and it turns out that he's a decent person with actual care for humanity, which is something not many of the other characters seem to have. She also just gets incredibly upset that they're taking the woman away from the orphanage, but whiplashes through emotions, and we're definitely meant to hate her and the other millennials, but the social commentary is just not there. It doesn't know what kind of point it's trying to make. And then there's the school shooting. The other sister was a victim of a school shooting. This is explicit in several early scenes. She has anti-gun propaganda on her Instagram type thing, and then flat out says it, as well as several flashbacks to it, including one in the party bus scene where the worst line of dialogue in any of the Texas Chainsaw films is uttered, which is a low bar, but "Try anything and you're canceled, bro," is said to Leatherface as he stands there with a chainsaw about to murder the entire bus. It was cringy in the trailer and is worse in the film, as it's this attempt at comedy, which they have a couple of times, which just doesn't work, because the rest of the film is trying to be this serious slasher, but then there are these moments where it's like, oh, we'll do some comedy here. And while there's definitely been comedy in the Texas Chainsaw franchise before, in fact, the second was basically just a comedy, and the first has some very sort of deeper, subtle, satirical elements. This has none of that. None of the subtlety, none of the satire, just nothing. So, as everyone's getting murdered, the main character has this flashback to a school shooting, so they're trying to draw some comparisons here between school shooting and a massacre by a serial killer. It doesn't work. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't make sense. It's heavy-handed social commentary with no commentary. That's not the only case where they have this sort of social issues brought up with influencers as the victims. There's some commentary about how they're gentrifying this old town or trying to be like that, but it's literally abandoned. There are 2 occupants in the town, so they're not taking it from anyone. It's just literally a ghost town. So there's just nothing there. It's the same. There's a Confederate flag up, and they make a bit of a point early on about that, how it means something. But again, there's no commentary. There's no discussion of it. It's just there. Same with gun laws, and the school shooting again gets even more confusing as the character gradually learns how to shoot a gun and then uses it in the final confrontation, so guns are good. The director made some interesting commentary about, in terms of the politics, it's not supposed to go one way or the other. It's supposed to be ambiguous, but it's not ambiguous. It's just not saying anything. It's letting the audience draw their own conclusions because there's no conclusions to be drawn. It's just confused and strange. The movie is also 80 minutes long, including 10 minutes of credits, which is astoundingly short, but it doesn't even feel like it's too short, like it's missing anything. There's just no substance in the film. And people love to say that, well, there's such a low bar, all the previous Texas Chainsaws have been bad, so why would you expect this one to be good? Why is there an expectation that it would be bad? Why couldn't they have made this one actually good? They took all these inspirations from Halloween 2018, which is generally well regarded. There are definitely issues with it, but it's well made and has competent characters, decent decisions. It's a good slasher film. This, on the other hand, just isn't any of those things, and lowering expectations to accept a bad film doesn't make a bad film good. It just lowers the audience expectations, and if you keep lowering them, then people keep making bad films as people keep accepting them. It just doesn't make sense. Overall, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first of its name, because previous films with that name had "the" in front, it's just awful. There's no redeeming qualities. You can say that, well, the kills are good, and yeah, they're bloody and well shot in terms of modern cinematography, but it doesn't mean anything. There's no care about the characters, there's no care about the environment or scares or tension or atmosphere or anything. So these well-shot kills are just pointless, just like the rest of the film. It's worth nothing. And there are a few films that are just utter wastes of space, and this is one of them. If this film were in a different franchise, it would be regarded higher, as on a slasher on its own, it's still not good. It still has incredibly dumb decisions and things that don't make sense, but at least it would get rid of some of the continuity issues, and they wouldn't have brought back Sally, who is just a completely and utterly pointless character, both in terms of a reference to the franchise and on their own, as they probably make the stupidest decisions in the film, which is saying something. On its own, as a slasher, it'd maybe be a 1.5 out of 5. But as a chainsaw film and what it represents, this is 0. It's nothing. It's garbage. This month, I'm actually going to be doing a number of videos on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, as there's quite a lot of good in it, and a lot of interesting things to say. But as for this film, don't watch it. It's trash. Please like, subscribe, take a look at my Patreon, and have a lovely day.